The battle for the Great Kingdom did not begin with a whimper, but with the deafening roar of a massacre. We kick things off with a brawl already in full swing, centered around the crumbling walls of the Daver fortress. This was the kingdom's last line of defense, a final stone barrier between civilization and the void. But that barrier was failing. The air was thick with the copper tang of blood and the suffocating stench of smoke. The soldiers of the fortress were being pushed back, inch by bloody inch, by a tide of orcs that seemed to have no end. On the ramparts, the scene was one of pure, unadulterated chaos. Scattered everywhere, human soldiers screamed until their throats were raw, desperately trying to boost the morale of the fallen and urging the survivors to kill every last one of those cursed monsters. They fought like men possessed, but they were exhausted. On the other side was the green-skinned horde, a sea of muscle and malice, yelling in a guttural dialect that sounded like stones grinding together. These monsters were winning the battle, not just through brute strength, but through a terrifying combination of magical and martial abilities. They weren't just warriors, they were weapons. Then the sky itself seemed to change. A heavy, oppressive red aura descended from the clouds, enveloping the entire battlefield in a sickly crimson glow. The vice commander, standing atop the inner wall, watched the light with eyes full of dread. He knew what it meant. This aura was a signal. The orcs were entering a berserk mode. Their strength doubled, their pain vanished, and their bloodlust became absolute. The commander's voice cracked as he announced that it was now only a matter of time before the gates fell. The sheer number of orcs already present was wreaking havoc, but the true terror lay in what was coming next. The orc lord was approaching. This was no ordinary chieftain. He was an aura master, a titan of power unlike any previous orc lord in history. It was whispered that if he unleashed his full power, the fortress wouldn't just be conquered, it would be erased. As the orcs began breaching the upper walls, one soldier, standing amidst the rubble and the screams of his brothers, bellowed at the top of his lungs. He ordered everyone to make the monsters retreat at all costs. "Protect the castle with your lives," he cried. It was a hero's final command. In that very moment, his life was extinguished as a massive orc foot came crashing down, crushing him into the dirt and silencing his voice forever. But as the light of hope faded, a new, chilling light took its place. A pale blue aura began to ripple over the battlefield, crawling like a cold mist over the mountains of corpses. As the light advanced, something impossible happened. The dead began to stir. Some of the remaining soldiers, paralyzed by terror, began to whisper, asking what this strange light was. They watched in disbelief as fallen friends and slaughtered enemies alike stood back up, their eyes glowing with an unnatural fire. From common soldiers to the green-skinned orcs, everyone was returning to life. The realization hit the battlefield like a physical blow. This was necromancy. In the Great Kingdom, such magic was forbidden, viewed as the ultimate dark sin. But who was behind this? As the dead rose, the orc lord was seen reveling in the destruction, swinging a blade that cleaved through stone and bone alike. He was a force of nature, laying waste to everything in his path. However, his celebration was about to be cut short. Our protagonist made his entrance through the shifting mist of the blue aura. He looked at the towering orc lord with a calm, analytical gaze. "Defeating you won't be easy with just these ordinary bodies," he remarked, his voice steady despite the carnage. he knew that an aura master of this caliber was a different breed of enemy. Without hesitation, he reached into the void and summoned a group of elite monsters to tip the scales. Now it was his turn to take the offensive. An army of the undead surged forward like a wave of bone and rusted steel. The Orc Lord mowed them down by the dozens, his massive aura acting like a scythe, but they simply kept coming. He raised his sword and struck the ground with such force that the earth shattered, sending bodies flying in every direction. In the middle of the dust, a skeleton lunged from the blind spot, narrowly missing a lethal blow. Enraged, the Orc Lord reached out, grabbing several summons in his massive hands to crush them. But it was a trap. From the front, a summon resembling a sleek, powerful leopard charged with blinding speed, latching onto the Orc Lord's throat. Simultaneously, the skeleton warrior seized the opening, driving its sword forward and forcing the Titan to stagger backward. That single moment of imbalance was all the little leopard needed. It landed a punch fueled by concentrated magic that sent the Aura Master flying through the air. Taking advantage of the chaos, the protagonist dove into the fray. He moved through the orcish ranks with the grace of a predator, wielding his sword with lethal precision. While his summons created a perimeter of death, a giant construct began channeling its energy, slamming a massive double punch into the ground that sent a shockwave through the orcish army. Above them, a dark fairy flitted through the smoke, her magic slicing enemies into ribbons before they even knew she was there. The soldiers watching from the inner walls were stunned into silence. A single man, using the most hated magic in existence, had turned the tide of a lost war single-handedly. The Orc Lord, pulling himself from the rubble, was possessed by a new kind of fury. He had never imagined that mere carrion, the bodies of his own fallen, could force him to retreat. He made it clear that this was not his defeat. It was only the beginning of his true wrath. But the protagonist wasn't afraid. He was calculating. He had noticed the Orc Lord's incredible talent, and he decided right then that he wanted that power for his own collection of summons. He drew his sword, the metal humming with dark energy. With a shout that echoed across the fortress, "Bunkai!" His blade transformed, segmenting into a jagged, spine-like whip. He charged. He threw the whip sword with a flick of his wrist, but the Orc Lord was fast, catching the weapon mid-air and pulling the protagonist toward him with a violent jerk. The weapon shattered into 1,000 pieces. Sensing victory, the Orc Lord raised his sword for a final, vertical strike. But the protagonist was faster. He defended himself with a second blade and summoned a massive creature of bone to intercept the killing blow. Face to face with the monster, the protagonist's magic flared. Thick, jagged bones erupted from the earth, shackling the Orc Lord's feet to the ground. "I must become even stronger," he muttered to himself. "For my survival, for the sake of those who are precious to me in this world, and to keep living as Adrius Cromwell." As he spoke, shadows and bone knit together around his body, forming a suit of terrifying armor. Clad in this spectral plate, he charged one last time. The Orc Lord, sensing a worthy opponent, let out a booming laugh. "Entertain me in this battle one last time," he roared. The two forces collided with the power of a falling star. The protagonist, now fully powered up and radiating a samurai-like aura, moved with such speed that the soldiers could only see flashes of blue and red light. The air hummed with tension. The protagonist's sword ignited with ethereal flames, turning the battlefield into a swirl of fire and shadow. The Orc Lord braced himself, channeling every ounce of his aura into his final stand. And then, in a flash of blinding light, the world went quiet, leaving everyone to wonder. What happens next? Would you like me to generate a script for the next episode? Or perhaps describe the unique abilities of the Orc Lord's soul once Adrius captures it?